On 1/1/2001, heaven would be consumed in a fiery blaze. Because of overcrowding and a lack of escape routes, the 300 young people inside of the popular cafe would be trapped, landing over 200 people in hospital, killing 14, and revealing a huge defect in the workings of the municipality of Volendam. Being situated in a building next to the dike, on the first floor in the city center of Volendam, Little Heaven was very popular with the locals, and would be packed on this fateful day. 80 were expected to come, yet around 300 would show up throughout the evening. The cafe had been decorated with fir branches almost a month prior, which had now dried out. It was after midnight, when employees would hand out sparklers to many of the patrons, which went fine for a while until someone ignited a pack of them, creating a burst of flame. In panic they would hold it up, spreading the fire to the incredibly dry branches on the ceiling. Surrounding people tore them down and extinguished them. Everything seemed fine. Until a massive flash fire suddenly erupted from the ceiling, reaching upwards of 500 degrees Celsius. The fire melted Christmas lights, short-circuiting the cafe and leaving the panicking patrons in the dark. People were scrambling to the emergency exit, which they were unable to open immediately because of an assembly error. Others tried going downstairs to the adjacent cafe, but either fell over or passed out on the stairs because of a lack of oxygen, causing them to pile up on top of each other. Even the windows weren't the means of escape, as they had bars in front of them. At 12:38, the first call was made to the emergency number with no details given, followed the next minute by a call detailing a fire and someone jumping out the window at the downstairs cafe. 12:42, an ambulance was dispatched only expecting a single victim, followed by a second as more and more calls came in. Only 11 minutes later, at 12:53, it became clear that it wasn't a small fire with less than 5 victims, and the decision was made to scale up. Arriving on scene, emergency services found the entire dike to be filled with wounded, walking around confused. There were dozens screaming, people were jumping into the bay, others jumped on the personnel, even tearing their clothes crying for help. A complete cacophony of misery. Firemen rushed into the building to extinguish the fire, but found the room devoid of heat, except for the burned victims still within the building. Communicating was all but impossible, with transceivers not working and phone connections overloaded. The new regional organization, the Medical Relief Organization in the region, GHOR, was called in to assist, and while policies were supposed to have been made to actually create the supposed organization, the region had been postponing this, and as such were woefully underprepared, and had to fall back on the old way of doing things, which went fairly well, except for it taking too long to get personnel on location. Some of the reasons for this were they were unable to contact a logistician. The mobile medical team had no transport, meaning the police had to drive them over, but only half of them would fit, so they had to wait for the next car. However, even this would go wrong, and instead an officer on a motorcycle would show up, and they had to wait even longer. The medical leader disaster site, who should have been directing things on-site, instead decided to only focus on reporting to personnel off-site. With many of the responders citing, they didn't even know he was there at all. Supply shortages lasted all night, even when there were entire stockpiles on site that went unused, as they weren't being delivered to the places that needed them. Because of differences in approach by the different forepersons, more confusion was added to the detriment of patient registrations. With proper personnel a long way out, people would start to drive the wounded to the closest hospital themselves. Less than half of the 200 who were admitted came in by any official means, most just shoving as many lightly wounded as they can into a van or car so they would be treated quicker. This, of course, ruining any oversight there might have been on the amount of victims and their identities, only adding to the overall confusion of the parents looking for their children. 2:10. Finally, the Sigma teams, the fast responding teams, would arrive, and together with the now present specialists and the ever-present confusion, tents were quickly set up to treat the badly wounded and to transport them when stable. Around 3:30, most victims had been moved to either the tent or the hospital, and it seemed the crisis would soon end. But then it was discovered there were even more victims in houses in the surrounding area, and work had to continue. Slowly, more and more ambulances would not return to the scene, and at around 5 a.m., all victims were transported. At around 3 a.m., a close-by restaurant was used to accommodate the many parents looking for their children, and to collect the lists of victims so they would know where to go. At around 5:30, most were gone, but some were still stuck waiting in overwhelming uncertainty, not knowing if their kid might be one of the two unidentified deceased. Despite this, they were kicked out, as the restaurant would now be used to debrief the emergency services personnel. They were instead brought to the police station, where short information about the two victims would be called out over the speakers, such as hair color, so the parents could determine if it was their child. If they suspected they were, they would be brought to the nearby church to look at the corpse to confirm this in person. The parents of one of these victims say they were only allowed to stay for a minute to confirm it was him, before being made to leave and never seeing him again. The disaster was caused by both gross negligence by the owner and the massive failures of the council. Across the entire country, there were backlogs in the approval of usage permits for buildings. In Volendam, none of the councillors even knew who was responsible for these permits in the first place. It was only when one of them stepped up to fix these issues that strides were made. The building owner had not applied for the new usage permit by April 2000, even though he was able to do this since 1993. He had renovated the place in such a way that the old escape routes were cut off. After an inspection, he was notified of both this fact, which he only planned to improve after the council kept insisting he had to, and the fact that the branches on the ceiling were a violation, especially as they hadn't been impregnated with a fire retardant. The council even sent him a written violation for this, also ordering him again to make sure the exits were sufficient, and telling him to train his staff in fire safety methods. Yet the council still let him use the property, resulting in this. After the disaster, the mayor and one of the councillors resigned, and the owner, the manager, and one of the employees, namely the owner's daughter, were indicted on 14 charges of negligent manslaughter and for causing grievous bodily harm. On the 18th of July 2003, a verdict was cast. The owner was convicted, receiving 12 months of conditional prison time, 240 hours of community service, as well as being unable to exercise the profession of catering entrepreneur. The other two would be acquitted, as they had no say in company matters. In the years after, the fire safety policies were sharpened around the country, and councils quickly got their act together so it would never happen again. This was TheLoresanctum. Have a nice day.